My name's Blaine Whitby. So good evening and welcome on behalf of BCS. We have monthly meetings here, open to all, free food. I'm sure they can hear me, or they can hear as much as they want to. Tonight we have a panel. We have 4 people from Electric Square and a short presentation, and then we'll have a panel to take your questions. The focus for tonight is on what it's really like to work in the games industry. So I hope you've got pertinent questions, well, assuming they're not all answered in the presentation. And I'll hand over. Do you want to
do a quick question for the Zoom side of it? Do we need to let people in?
No, we'll don't worry, we'll handle the online stuff.
I can't. Yes. Hello. Cool. Hi. Thanks all for coming. My name is Tim Chapman. I'm the head of technology at Electric Square. I bring with me Dan Purcell, George Foote, and Carlton Gaunt, who represent art, engineering, and design at our studio, respectively. We're going to talk a little bit about each of those disciplines, what it takes to do that job, things you might need to get into the industry. There's a little video in the middle to sort of hear a bit about people who work at Electric Square and how they got there. And then we'll try and go as quick as we can to get to Q&A, so we can kind of just open the floor to anyone who's got questions. However, we've not done this talk before, so it might take longer than we think. We'll try and keep it moving. Just to start with a little bit of info about us as a studio. We're based in Brighton. We've existed for 8.5 years. I'm one of the founders of the studio. So we're now over 300 developers. We have 3 studios. I'm just opening a 4th actually in Ireland, so this slide's a little bit out of date already. Brighton is our main base. We have just over 170 developers based in the area and in the UK. Some based in the city, some who work hybrid, some who work remote. We have a second studio in Malta that's quite new. There's about 15 people based there, and more in Singapore. For historical reasons I won't go into right now. Specifically, and different to perhaps what you might imagine a typical games studio, we do co-development, which means we work with other games studios that publish the games. So typically, it will be IP that we don't own. In fact, as a company, we purposely don't own our own IP, but we aim to work on high-profile IP and projects that other companies can publish. We are full development, which means we're doing both all the disciplines, so art, design, code, QA, audio, and obviously production to tie it all together. Focus on AAA console development these days, although historically we've worked on mobile and pretty much most bits of hardware along the last existence of the company. As I say there on the slide, we're engine and technology agnostic, which means people who work at Electric Square need to be kind of happy to pick up a Unity project or an Unreal project or a proprietary engine. And again, we've worked in all of those multiple times. I'll show a video in a minute, but we try to work, as I say, with top-tier clients around the world. Trying to think of this the big list, but it's at the end of the video. But from the likes of EA, Blizzard, Build a Rocket Boy, Apple. We have an Apple Arcade titles. We'll see in a minute. And lastly, we're a staff-centric employer, and I kind of want to highlight that because we don't have our own tech. We're not building our own engine. That's not our business. Our business is about our people. And the brain trust and the skills that they bring, which is what we then work and bring to other companies. So we put a lot of effort into making sure it's a good work-life balance. The DEI, we focus on that quite heavily, and social events and all of that thing. We try to avoid classic game industry things like crunch, for example, because we were aware that's not a sustainable way to run your business. Okay, so short video now. It's going to be our show reel from the end of last year. Give you an idea of the kinds of titles we work on, and then I'll hand over to Dan.
Is this working? Yeah, sounds like. Cool. Yeah, so that's pretty much all the games we've done at Electric Square. So I'm going to introduce myself in the next slide, but what we want to do is essentially inspire you. You know, if anyone's interested in games, obviously, oh, pressing the wrong button here. Sorry. You know, and sort of follow a games career. Where it can take you and give you an idea of what skill sets it takes to be a developer. I'm going to talk about the importance of reference as well as an artist, and how to develop a portfolio. I'm going to talk about specializing and also T-shaped skills that give you sort of more general skills that are expected. And I'm going to show you a bit of my career path as well, how I got into games. In a video as well, just showing some of our colleagues being interviewed. So that's an overview. So on to art, right? So who am I? This is me. So I will introduce myself, Daniel Purcell. I've been in games for 19 years now. Originally from a little village in Cumbria. I'm a huge gamer. I love developing them. I'm into playing music, going to metal gigs, in flames. I love festivals, going on a camp van, playing like surfing, and yeah, sat in the office means that I'd put more effort into doing outdoor stuff, basically. So these are some of my hobbies and things. And I now live and work in Brighton. So I moved here about 5 years ago. And so I, like yourselves, went to university. I went to Leeds, and I studied games art and design. And I found it the most valuable thing for me to get into games development. I started an internship back at Lionhead Studios, obviously before it got shut. And they offered me a full-time job once I finished. So, oops, I'm not a Mac user. And I left with a first-class honours and the Focal Press Prize for Excellence, and I was really proud of that. So that's my sort of education. And then this is my career path with what studios I've worked at the top and some of the games that I've worked on. I started as a tester originally after university, and worked my way through the ladder from design and then eventually art, that's where my heart was, and that's what I studied at university. And I knew it would be great to get there. It took a lot of determination because games were a massive passion of mine. And because of that, it never felt like work. It was, you know, it's one of my sort of passions in life. Until Dawn, somewhere in there, that one. It's probably the most prestigious game I worked on. It was 5 years development. We did it twice, did it on PS3 and then PS4. So I poured a lot of energy into that project. And also, one thing to mention is do expect to work on games that don't come out. So, Dragonology, that one up there, never came out. Wizardology, never came out. But I still worked on them for about 2.5 years. But one thing you do take away with it is the learnings. So, and your skills. and also a bit of a portfolio, which is good. So when you finish uni, don't think that that's the end of your education. It'll never stops. Basically, every day, you're constantly keeping up with new tech, new software, techniques, and teaching and helping each other as well is a big part of the job. So you'll always have some new skills to learn in games. And at university, it just felt like that was the start of my career in games. So this is some of the shots from learning mocap for a start, and working with actors, building white box sets for the mocap and making sure it's all to metrically sound sort of spec. This is my environment work, but I also did lighting as well, which is a bit dark on that, but for cinematics. So what does it take to be a games developer? Well, you've got creativity and passion, and this is really where it all starts. So why we get into games, passionate about it. It's not an easy ride, but these attributes means it's a rewarding job. Technical abilities, like it's really important, even as a 3D artist, in all disciplines, you'll be required to troubleshoot problems and issues. You help develop pipelines, workflows, and as you grow and develop, you'll develop these skills as well. Following direction and feedback, you won't be creating your own vision. It's not your vision, but you make it your own. So in your daily work, you get assigned things and you will follow the big top level direction, but the areas that you're working in, you make it your own. You put your own flair in there, and taking constructive feedback is a big part of it. And separating yourself from your work. Don't take it personally. It's, yeah, you put pouring energy into something, but at the same time, you're going to get loads of feedback and it'll be iterative as well. So something to take away. I mentioned it earlier, but specialised and T-shaped skills. So earlier in your career, it's time to explore different areas of interest. Don't pigeonhole yourself into one thing. And with T-shaped skills, it allows you to sort of be more valuable and branch out into different areas, especially as projects come and go as well. You'll find that like, oh, I can do that, I can do this, I can do a bit of lighting, I can do some rigging. You know, you can branch out and find in these different areas, and people do move between roles within the industry as well. I went through design, QA, art, but within art, you can move into different branches as well. So, but the other guys will talk about the other disciplines. So problem solving, technical abilities, you do it every day for yourself, but also for others. You'll always be like, someone will have an issue. So you can, if it's most of the time, if you've been working within a similar area to someone else, you probably help them out. But you'll gain a lot of that as you grow as an artist in the industry. Following ref and concept as well. So this is key as an artist. So I'll talk about this a bit later, but a lot of artists don't gather enough reference. And then as well, they don't follow it. Even with stylized artwork, believability is so important, and you should really follow reference and use it it's easy to fall into an uncanny valley trap. And working cross discipline as well. So you will work with other disciplines, code, animation, design, QA, and you need to be able to work with all those disciplines and also understand them as well. Bit of studio structure. So you've got directors management. Most of the disciplines here, there are generalized like IT and things like that outside of this, but I've keep it focused on the creative side. So this is what you should expect when you join a studio. The directors, so drive the studio strategy and the direction. So that's the high level vision of what the studio's doing. The management, do project level management. So that's kind of like each project has its own project manager. And then you'll have all the disciplines and their respective leads. And that's kind of like the overview of a structure of the studio. Onto the art team, right? So you've got the art director, that's your visionary. So they steer the project's vision alongside design, the director, the tech director, working together to try and make the game, obviously hit frame rate, memory, stuff like that, and get it on console. So that's pretty important. Then you've got the lead, who will help keep everyone busy, but also help with that vision as well. And then based on the project size, you've discipline leads can have like principals as well, to help support the larger projects. So it does branch out quite a lot based on the project size. You will be able to specialize in these areas, but when it comes to the smaller projects, having T-shaped skills really is valuable, because you can then do quick prototyping and things like that for that stuff. So a bit on the discipline details. So this is very art focused, but I've chucked in a few others as well. So the design side, so the designers that Carlton will go over, is the glue between all the departments. So they're pulling everything together. You've got all the coders and stuff. So you work really closely with design. They are literally the glue. They pull all the bits together. Animation. So as an artist, I work really close with animators. They're really interested in metrics and consistency. The less consistent your artwork is, especially for doors and whatever they need to animate with, they'll be annoyed at you. So you don't want that. And then lighting, we feed, obviously, for environment work and things like that, we feed the lighting guys. So this is for like real time as well as baked and cutscenes and things like that. But as an artist, I need to be mindful of, you might not know anything about this, but PBR, which is called physically based rendering, values are really important to keep consistent across the game. Even in stylized stuff, if you're working with a modern engine, the tonal values, hue ranges and midtones, you want all that consistent, because your lighting artists will not be happy if it doesn't all balance very nicely. And then you've got code, so working on features that the artists feed into it. So most recently, I've been working on a vehicle pipeline with Carlton for vehicle damage, and I feed that with sculpt data, damage zones, shader breakdowns, and then design, set up that system to pull it together. And the code guys have been sort of modifying the shader so that it all feeds in, and there's a lot of C++ in that as well. But I won't go into that because that's code guys. And then from art, you've got generalists right through to character art. But people do have T-shaped skills, and they generally sort of have foundation art skills as well. So that can help with branching out and moving into different disciplines. And then tech art. So most TAs have a bit of an artist background. Some come from code as well. But generally, you've got rigging, shaders, tools, procedural tools as well. And a TA, having foundational art skills is a good, valuable trait to have as a TA, because you'll be able to help troubleshoot for artists. And then you've got QA. So in QA, that's where I started originally. And this is basically just keeping things in check, having really good problem solving skills, breaking things down, a lot of patience as well. And they do work closely with a lot of disciplines to QA. So generally, it's good to know your team. A bit on reference trips. So I want to talk a little bit of the importance of this. As I mentioned earlier, reference brings believability to your art. That's if you follow it. Even in stylized games, there's rules about color, proportion, scale, anatomy, geology, rock formation, soil types, history, culture. All of that is so important, and you want to keep that. If you're just telling a story in a game, then these things get reference. It's really important. Stylized stuff, you'll always have a reference sheet. And then if it's quite unusual and not real, like fantastical, that's where you get concept art in. But concept artists still use reference. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that it's really important. This trip here is when we did Dirt Rally. We basically rebuilt a section of forest called Craigvinian Forest in Scotland. And yeah, we had to go around on e-bikes because we weren't allowed to take the car around. But yeah, lots of footage, lots of images of the soil types, the tree types. Yeah, so that was a really cool trip. But yeah, it's really important. Concept art. So using reference, you make concept art. So we take the reference, we build it. So you can see here, this is quite stylized stuff. So this is an Electric Square game for Apple Arcade. Detonation Racing. It's very stylized, quite cartoony, but still within the realms of believability. We want realistic proportions and, well, you can exaggerate proportions, but it's within the realms of reality. And then this is one of our very old concept artists that we used to work here. But yeah, it's called Gavin Manners. He does a lot of mechs and sci-fi style stuff. But yeah, I wanted to mention a bit about that. Interviews. So I've been on both sides of this, mostly the interviewer nowadays, but I'm going to give you a few tips. So learn about the studio. Definitely learn about it. Don't wing it. It's good to do a bit of research. Just look at what games they've made. Look at a bit about the history, who are the founders. And then also, as an artist, it's very artist-centric, this, but prepare for detailed questions and walkthroughs of your work. So if you've got a portfolio, areas that you would do differently, because obviously you've got artwork that you're going to show, it's really important to be able to break that down, talk about it, how you did it, but also be able to, people will ask questions about what if you did it, what would you do differently? Why, and be able to answer those questions. Have a little bit of prep in your mind about that stuff. And then also a good thing to know is areas that you want to further develop. So it's like, we don't call them areas for improvement, we call it areas of development. So it's things that you think, I want to develop this skill here, whether it's ZBrush, which is sculpting package. It's just knowing that stuff, because you will get asked, so like, is there any areas that you're not comfortable with, any areas that you feel like you want to develop further? So it's a good thing there. Bit about portfolio. So this is a snippet of mine. I'm just going to give you a few tips of what to look out for when you develop this. So this is ArtStation, if anyone has one. Basically, it's just an online portfolio. I have a personal one as well, but ArtStation is like the outfaced public one. So managing your portfolio, don't be scared to clear out and cull dated artwork. You will grow, and so will your skills and your artistic abilities. So keep it live, keep it up to date with new skills and relevant techniques. The industry constantly evolves, so should you. Don't clutter it with too much. Having it some quality signature pieces that really show your artistic and technical abilities is really key. So a bit on skills and career path. Team fit, it's really important. Be someone who people want to work with. Just being a talented artist, it's just not everything. Like if you're a good team member and you've got a positive and supportive attitude, it will get you far. Being self-critiquing and separating yourself from your work, like I said earlier, constructive feedback, being able to receive that and deal with it and be like, yep, no, I can fix that, I'll do that. So don't feel like you are your art. Don't take it personally. It's really, really important. And actively look for feedback as well. Peer reviews, it's a really good thing to do. Just go around, see how, what do you think of this? Is there anything you'd change? Did you get a reference for it? Have you followed it? Is there anything that didn't make sense? These are just some little tips that I've got. The other thing is just like being patient. Games take so many years to make, and do respect our NDAs, non-disclosure agreement, and security. It's really important that we don't give away anything that we're working on that's not announced yet. And when your game's a success, your art will be seen by millions, and they might not know who made it, but it's you. And that's really cool. And just focus on your talents, not the money. It's not important, the money. With good talent comes, the money comes later. It's not important. It's just, yeah, I think the best developers that I've ever worked with are the ones that just have passion for games. Do we need to do a break, or do you want me to? This is this video. Right, got you. That makes sense. So I went around and interviewed a few of our guys, because obviously we can't just all be here. So a bit of in the inner workings of Electric Square and a bit about how they got into games. So I put this video together, and these are some of my mates, and I will show you this. Welcome to Electric Square. I wanted to give you a tour of where we work and what we do. So I'm going to introduce you to some of the guys here.
I started working in the industry in 2000. Yes, I'm that old. And I was working for several games companies up until 2010, where I went freelance and I started working in TV and film as a character artist, predominantly making high-res characters for shows like Whisper, Carlton Network, some Marvel stuff, some History Channel stuff.
And before I started with Electric Square, I studied in Belgium. It's called Digital Arts and Entertainment. And I did a major in VFX animation because I was always inspired by cinematics or games. And afterwards, I did my internship at an artist company in Belgium. And I worked there for around 2 years, doing all kinds of artist stuff, which was nice, but I wanted a new challenge, so that's why I went to the UK, and I luckily could start here in Electric Square.
I guess before I got into the games industry, the sort of standout job I had was a comic book illustrator. I used to mostly work for Joe Strait, 2008, and then just kind of blundered my way into the games industry. And for a while I was an environment artist, but a few years back I went back to doing what I love, which is drawing and illustration.
I went to Sussex University. Initially, I did music technology, which had nothing to do with games. And then afterwards, I did a master's in programming. And then this is my first job in the games industry to get a foot in the door.
I went to a games industry social event and ended up chatting to the right person, and he gave my portfolio to his art director, and then that was Jay, and here I am. I got interviewed 2 weeks later, and yeah, just got the job, which is very lucky. That was a year ago now, so it's always nerve-wracking, like doing a career change, but you know, it was really, really worth it. So yeah, very much enjoyed what I'm doing now.
Right, so I got into games a long time ago. When video game art was a new job, really, so I'm first generation artist. I like computers, I liked artwork, I love video games, and then there were starting to be jobs for people who were good artists in video games. So I was rubbish at coding, so I couldn't do that. So yeah, just moved out of fine art and doing work as a oil painter on canvas into computer art, and my art teacher said give up on my degree for a year, try this out because it was already working, and if it all went wrong, go back, finish my degree, and then I'd get a proper job. And that was 32 years ago or something, and I haven't had to go back and get a proper job yet.
Definitely the people. The games are nice, but the people are really, really cool. So when I come to work, and I'm gonna have a good time with my working with. It's a good vibe. Everyone's cool. Yeah, it's nice.
I think it's probably the people, like everybody is super helpful, awesome, and they've learned me a lot of new things, which is why I came here.
It's definitely the culture and the people. I've worked with many of the people for many years at other companies, but they seem to have a perfect knack of getting the right people that fit perfectly, and everyone's so lovely and helpful, and yeah, it's a great place to work.
I'm surrounded by a lot of funny, intelligent people that are really passionate about what they do, and they get very excited about things like Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, which I like a lot as well.
Oh yeah, the people are good as well. You know.
You are, Dan.
Thanks, mate.
That thing about going and getting a proper job one day, I haven't got a proper job. I'm just having a laugh and a good day for it.
Mate, that was amazing. Thank you.
Oh.
Cool. That is the end of the art side. So thank you for your time. Pass over to Carlton.
Is this on? Am I coming through correctly? Can you all hear me clearly, even at the back? Fantastic. So just a short introduction. So this is going to be about the design section, a little bit about who I am, why you should listen to me, why my opinion has some value. Then we're going to go into a bit of what is a design team, like what are the kind of people you're going to be you're going to see in a design department, what are their responsibilities, if you go into design, where can you specialize? A bit about what does the job look like on the day-to-day at various stages of development, as well as what does the job not look like. A lot of people have some common misconceptions about design, I'd like to try and dispel those whilst I have your attention. Then a little bit about what you need to know to go into design, the kind of skills that can help you become a designer, and then some interview help and some general advice. Do I just click to? Right arrow works as well. So yes, hello everyone. I'm Carlton Gaunt. I'm an experienced designer at Electric Square. I've been there for 3 years now. I've been a game designer for 8 in total. I love games, love play, always have done. My earliest, fondest memories are exploring digital worlds, and I've been playing my entire life. It's great. I've been a tournament organizer and competitor in a previous life, Smash Brothers specifically, for about 10 years or so, competing and organizing some very large tournaments. Great fun. Picked up calligraphy during lockdown, very useful skill, very practical. I send the best Christmas cards you've ever seen. So I started working remote when I was with Electric Square, lived up in Middlesbrough, moved down to Brighton about 2 years ago to be able to be close with the people I work with, to learn more from them and collaborate more efficiently. And it was absolutely the right choice for me. As the journey I took in games design, started out in college. Lancaster and Morecambe did 2 years in video game design and development, then moved into university at Teesside, did a year of foundation art, 3 years of computer games design. Had my first job not long, well, quite a bit long after that, actually. More observant will notice there's a 3-year gap. Don't expect to go straight from university into a job. It doesn't always happen. It is a rare thing. You can spend time building your skills, developing your portfolio, developing yourself, and being ready when the opportunity calls. It's the right thing to do. But yeah, started in 2016 as a designer on an anti-gravity racing game called Formula Fusion. We spent the next 4 years remaking it into Pacer. And since then, I've been working at Electric Square on Everywhere and other titles that I can't really talk about right now. So this is kind of the design disciplines, the team that you'll meet, and well, this is not prescriptive. Obviously, this will change depending on the size of the studio and on the projects you're working on. It's split kind of left and right at the very top. So design director, lead designer are kind of the oversight career path, as I call it. That's where you become responsible for general mentorship of designers underneath you. You'll be responsible for scheduling, budgeting, planning, liaising with clients on broader projects. On the right side, when you have the design expert and principal designer, these are more specialized career paths. This is for someone that is much more hands-on, that is dedicated to a subspecialty of design, such as anyone at the bottom, the kind of people that you'll see giving keynote speeches at Develop or GDC, for example. Their responsibilities tend to be in mentorship in their specialist areas, as well as outreach, liaising. They have a lot of creative control within a project, the higher up you go, and they get more freedom within their remit. Seniors are kind of a bridge between leads and juniors. They will be responsible for mentorship within their chosen specialization. They'll have ownership within a system, and they'll be able to have a lot of creative control within that. As you start out, you'll go from, say, junior to mid-tier to experienced designer, where I am, and you'll start out quite incidental. You'll work on smaller features, smaller areas. There'll be more oversight. There'll be more regular feedback from superiors. Then as your skills increase and your responsibility grows, the scope of your tasks does, your oversight reduces, and you develop. So design is interesting, specifically throughout games development, because you always have a job, you always have a role. No matter what stage the project is in, you will have something to do and your skills will be in demand. Other specialties, audio, animation. Audio is actually a really good one because it is specialized, highly used, very effective, absolutely essential. But your audio team may only be in force and at full speed for a short period of the game's life, as it were, or the development life. But in design, you will be planning, prototyping, and scheduling at the start. You'll be figuring out what the full project looks like, What do the features look like? Are they fun? So get it in your hands, a very simple version. Does it play well? If it doesn't, how does it, can we change it in a small way to make it more engaging? When you get into production, you'll start specifying these things out into more concrete systems. You kind of answered the questions of what's fun, what's not, and what, this is the point where you'll define what your levers are, what your metrics are, what controls you have to modify the game as it plays, how does it progress, how do you engage people over the life of the game. You'll start creating it, implementing it, and then based on feedback and how it fits with the other systems in the game, you'll be tuning, refining, polishing. That continues all the way through to post-launch. The job is not about being a dictator. A designer is not a director. In a movie, you are not there to exhibit a stranglehold and tell people how this is going to be done. I wouldn't dare to tell any of my coders how to do their job, mostly because they do it better than I do. So it is about kind of scoping out a system that you think meets the brief and defining what you want the expectation, the end result to be. And then you pass that on to somebody else that will implement it and create it, and you trust that they know what they're doing because they know what they're doing. They know how to do it. Ideas are valueless. This might sound a bit downer, but it's something that is true. Don't be an ideas person. Everyone is an ideas person, and ideas on their own have no value whatsoever. I could give you a notebook with 100 ideas in it, and as soon as it leaves my hand, it's worthless. It's nothing to you. You have ideas, you add value to them through your work. Don't try and think that they're worth something they're not. Everyone's got creative control within their own areas, their own remits. We discussed this. You do kind of need to know where your battles are. We'll talk a bit more about communication in the future, but you have a limited, let's say, gravitas within your role. You will need to convince other people that some ideas are good and other ideas just maybe aren't worth your effort to fight. You'll learn more as you develop, as you design, as you become better, which hills are worth dying on. Any concept you come up with is never complete. That's not your job. Your job isn't to think of everything immediately because you can't do it. As soon as you create it, as soon as you implement it, someone will have a better idea or a different idea or something unexpected happens. The corollary to that is the game is never complete. It is just finished. There's always something more you can do. There's always some tuning, some polish, some extra you can put in. At some point, you need to ship it. It needs to release and go out of the door. So if you can find out upfront where your limits and your boundaries are and what complete or finished capable means, all the better. And the next slide is kind of what do you need to know to be a designer? What is good foundational knowledge? And everything is pretty much it. There is no such thing as useless knowledge. All knowledge has value, and I am lucky to be in an industry where that is borne out so often. There's loads of useless knowledge I have in me. I found some use for it every time, but omniscience takes a while. So if you want to focus on some skills, here's a good place to go. Communication is number 1, 2, and 3 skills for a designer. As Dan mentioned, you'll be working with a lot of other disciplines. You'll be working with art. You'll be working with code, with animation, with audio, with business people, with producers, with advertisers and executives. And you will need to be able to understand and communicate with these people and generate consensus. If I need to pass a feature off, say, a vehicle. We're making a car in a game, and I need to create a description, a specification for that car in such a way that art department will make it, code will make it function, art will make it look great, the doors will work, the steering wheel works. Everyone comes away with the same idea of what the end product will look like. And that's our responsibility. At the same time, someone will come to you with some feedback that may not be that helpful. It's on you to find the useful bits in that. So many times I've put a game in front of someone, they've picked it up and said, this doesn't feel right. What do you mean by that? I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. Well, you've got to figure out what that means. Technical writing goes hand in hand with communication. This is not creative writing. This is things like sentence structure, grammar, syntax, the ability to articulate clearly and use different communication tools to get the idea and concept across. Maths is a good start. You won't need any higher maths for this. A lot of people say, do you need A-level or O-level maths? No. GCSE maths will do you more often than not, but it will need to be like a GCSE B, like decent maths at least. Depending on where you go, which studios you work in, which projects you work on, there may be a need for further maths. If you were to work on, say, EVE Online, for example, you'd need a good grounding in economics. If you worked in simulations, maybe calculus helps. But more often than not, GCSE maths will be good, specifically algebra, so learn how transforms work, and probability. You're working with odds and statistics. Also learning a good couple of probability traps like the Monty Hall problem, the Alfaro bar problem, the prisoner's dilemma, and Bertrand's boxes will go a long way. You should know how players will interact with your game, what they're likely to do, how a person perceives information, understands it, turns that into a plan of action in their head, and how they think about how they want to execute that action, how they understand the consequences of it. You want to learn about things like operant conditioning, as well as motivations, intrinsic and extrinsic. History is a lighter skill, especially mythology. These are some of the best stories, some of the longest lasting stories that we ever tell each other are myths and legends. They're very pervasive, very evocative. You should read them and understand why. And life experience. Life experience is another big one. I always say it is better to be someone that sees something very cool happen in a video game and relates it to something that happened to them in real life, as opposed to someone that sees something cool in real life and says, oh, that was just like that video game thing the other day. Both people are useful. The first one, much more so. So interview skills, common questions that you'll get. Favorite game is crossed out. A lot of people will still ask this question, but I tend not to. It's falling out of grace because it's subjective. My favorite Star Wars film is The Phantom Menace. I'm sorry, my father took me to see it when I was a boy. What does that tell you about my skills in cinematography? Zero. Absolutely nothing. It's too personal. Some people will still ask it, and they're not looking for a personal link or why you enjoy it. They are looking for you to justify your decision. They are looking for you to tell them something interesting about it. If I was to talk about the practical effects in The Phantom Menace, maybe that would speak to my cinematography experience. A good question instead is give an example of an asset. So the top picture in there, probably a bit before most times in this, that's a level from Unreal Tournament, DM Deck 16, fantastic level. Why is it a fantastic level for a first-person shooter? Because all of the high power-ups are on the high walkways. They're thin. You can see it from a lot of different positions. When you want to move towards more powerful objects, you put yourself at risk at the same time. This creates an interesting corollary. Tells you a little bit about level design, about my experience with it. That's a good question, a decent answer to have. You will get asked what your idea process is. So someone may come to you and say, I had this fantastic idea for a game. It's this. It is a basketball on the moon. Go with it. What do you do? And you say, oh, basketball on the moon. Okay. What we are looking for is a process. Do you have a process? And what is that process? Do you launch into it with confidence? So there are mostly two ways to go about this, or most answers tend to fall into two categories. One of them is someone that will prototype it immediately. They'll find a blank project with a person and a ball, and they'll set the gravity to 0.3, and they'll get it in their hands and run with it. They're like, okay, well, this is working, this isn't. Maybe we'll make these adjustments. Maybe we'll introduce this option. The other direction tends to be a bit more planning for thought. It is looking for other sports simulation games with unusual gravity, looking at other basketball games, saying, is this only going to be on the moon? Is there going to be other planets? It's someone that asks for greater context before they wind up getting in. There isn't a wrong answer either way. Like I say, what we're looking for is a process. And if you don't have one, that's absolutely fine. If you're interviewing for a junior position, you may not have one, And it could be good to not have a process because that means that whoever you work with can influence what that process is. Concept idea in game. This, if you interview with a larger studio, especially ones with established IPs, you may come across this. It works better with an example. Let's say I'm applying for Ubisoft and they say, okay, we have this fantastic game series you may have heard of called Far Cry. We need a new enemy for an upcoming DLC. What do they look like? Okay, what's the brief? Well, the players tend to be either explosive and aggressive or long-range snipers or tacticians. This enemy needs to engage and combat and be defeatable by all of them. You need to specify that out, what that does, what it looks like. Okay, advice for everyone. This is the last slide. For everyone, no matter what job you go into, no matter what you do, be a nice person. 50% of any job you ever have is being a nice person to work with and a nice person in general. Not difficult. Be generous with your time. Keep bad words out of your mouth. Keep your hands to yourself without consent. It is simple. Developers, specifically, those of you that do go into creative industries, estimate your time wisely. You will be required to provide time estimates for all of your tasks. When you start out, there will be an urge to make these estimates smaller than you should in order to increase the perceived value of your labor, and by extension, yourself. Crush this urge. Your first swing is not going to be your best swing, and as Dan's already said, your work will need to be reviewed and it will need to be revised 2 times, 3 times, sometimes even more. It's better to estimate over and come in under budget. Your producers will thank you for it. Designers specifically, don't put dogs in your game if you won't let me pet them. The first thing I want to do when I see a dog in a game is scratch it. I see a bubble, I pop it. I see a stress ball, I squeeze it. I see a pair of tongs, I pick them up. Everyone does it. You need to understand when you design something into a system, what the scope of that is, the amount of work you're asking other people to do, as well as how your players are likely to want to interact with it, especially if that is not the primary intention behind whatever it is you're implementing. All of your decisions will have a scope that is beyond yourself, and you should be sensitive to what that is. Thank you.
Is that good? Can you hear me? So hi, I'm George Foote. I am the Studio Technical Director at Electric Square, which means that I am responsible for all of the engineers employed at Electric Square. I'll do a little bit about me. I've been in the video game industry for 24 years, I think, since 2000, and so that's easy to remember. And I studied mathematics at university. Not computer science, as you might expect for an engineer, but there is a bit of variety about, you know, the sort of educational background that people coming into this sort of role have. And maths is very useful as well across all of engineering anyway. I'm not going to talk in quite as much detail as the others have, because a lot of the things that they've said also apply equally well to engineering, but I did want to touch on a couple of things that are maybe a little bit different. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was game engines. So as part of our role at Electric Square, as Tim said, we don't have our own internal technology. So because we're often working on various different clients' projects, we have to work in different game engines on different projects there. So something that's very important, particularly in our organization, is the flexibility for engineers to be able to work in these different environments. Some of these off-the-shelf engines like Unreal Engine and Unity are quite common in the games industry, and you guys probably already know about them. Godot is a more minor one these days, which is up and coming, I believe. Lumberyard, it's been around for a while now. It's not used as much. But a lot of our clients have their own proprietary engines, as I said. Frostbite, for example, is the one that's used in Battlefield by Electronic Arts. And there's a whole variety of those. They're all very different, and it's very important for us that our engineers have the flexibility to get on with different engines, to learn how they work, and to to kind of learn to apply their past knowledge to a different engine. The second point I've got here is regarding the languages we use, the programming languages. Across the games industry, C++ is very common, and it's used, for example, in all Unreal Engine games. Most game engines are based on C++. C# is also used, it's maybe less common. It's the one that's used by Unity games, although that does sometimes come down to C++ as well. Other than those, there are special purpose languages which are used for specific features. HLSL is used for, excuse me, HLSL is used for shader authoring in a lot of cases. So that's a very specific niche that comes up in. Python, Lua, sometimes used for scripting, sometimes used for things like automation processes behind the scenes that we also have to work on. So I would say that not everybody knows those ones in particular, but the C++ is particularly important for us as an employer, and C#, maybe other employers may be taking people on specifically to work on C# projects. So those are the things you need to be strongest at in order to get into this industry. So Dan and Carlton talked a lot about teamwork and about the people, and how a big part of your job is working with other people. So I thought I'd go through a couple of cases where engineers need to work particularly with the other departments. So first of all, working closely with art and design. This comes up right at the start of any task. We need to agree on the brief for the task. We need everybody who's going to be involved to agree what it is we're trying to achieve. This starts with the designers, as Carlton said, but then from there, the other departments get more involved and need to kind of flesh out that initial design into something that we believe we can actually make. Art are also particularly useful during tasks for producing placeholder assets or even final game assets that the engineers are going to need in order to check their work, so to check their code's working properly. And also feedback and iteration constantly throughout the tasks is really important to engage with the other departments and see how they feel about what you're doing. Is it achieving the goals? Things like that. So the next point I had here was working with other engineers. So you're also not on your own when you're working on a task. That you're going to be surrounded by a lot of other clever people who you can call on for help, for assistance, not just senior people you call on for mentorship, but just your peers as well. It's really important to discuss things with each other. It really helps to sort of identify whether there are better ways of doing things. Just more pairs of eyes is just really helpful for that sort of thing. And the last point here was working with production. So the producers, we haven't really talked much about them, but they work alongside the creative developers to make sure that the project is kept on track. So you engage with them at the start of tasks, you give them sort of time estimates for things, as Carlton said, and you should be generous with those estimates. That is very important. Nobody is good at estimating how long something will take. If you all get it wrong, no one's going to get angry with you for it. The most important thing is to refine that skill over time. But the producers will then sort of track that time. And if you feel that you're getting behind schedule, then it's important to let them know, or ahead of schedule, either way. It just helps to coordinate the activity with the rest of the team members. So the last thing I wanted to do was talk a little bit about specialisms. Dan mentioned T-shaped people quite a lot. And what we mean by that is generalists who are adaptable to a wide range of different topics with perhaps a speciality in a certain topic. And it's not necessarily the case that you'll have a speciality from the get-go. That's absolutely fine. And certainly our priority is really on the generalization of that, because we need people to be adaptable. But I thought I'd talk through a couple of different specialisms here that you might be interested in. These are just examples. So gameplay would be implementing things like the character movement, the camera control, interactions with objects in the world or with other players, that sort of thing. Combat, aiming, shooting weapons, all of those things. And unique game features, the thing that makes the game different from other games, would generally fall into that category. The next one I had was vehicle physics. So this is something that we do quite a bit of at Electric Square. You have wheeled vehicles like cars and bikes. And for bikes in particular, you need to do things like make sure the bike balances, which is different from a car. Cars will tend to stay on their four wheels on their own, but bikes need some assistance with that. Some of the engines have built-in models for these things, but they're never quite right. And in order to get what the designers want out of them, we have to adapt those models, add new behaviors to them and things like that. And then flying vehicles, I just put examples of drones, helicopters and planes. Obviously, they behave very differently to cars, and we would generally need to implement them from scratch whenever we want to do that sort of thing. Then another example of a specialism, it's my last one, was profiling and optimization. So this is obviously a more deep sort of technical skill. Typically in this sort of thing, we would be using tools to measure the performance of the game, identifying hotspots, areas where the game is too slow, implementing mitigations, and then just kind of profiling again and sort of looping around until the game's performance is up to scratch. But those are the only specialisms I kind of prepared here. There are lots of different things you could specialize in over time. The most important thing is to just get started and try a lot of different things, and then see what you're attached to, see what you're good at. They might be the same thing, and then you can make your specialism there. That's all I had.
Hey, cool. So hope that wasn't too long. One of the things with the games industry is even more than like films, it covers every possible area that you might want to work in, be it art, audio, programming, design, production, and it all has to work in real time as well. Plus you've got analytics, advertising, blah, 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 blah. So there's a lot to cover. We're going to do Q&A now. We're here for as long as you have questions. And also Val is joining us. Say hi.
Here's Val Knight, who did a placement with Unity last year, so pretty recent experience. I think the less I say, the better. Questions, please.
That about covers it. I worked as a support engineer on the ISS team, which is handle integrated support services, handles engine support, software engineer. You guys are probably, I think you guys have worked with ISS, right? Yeah, cool. So ISS covers like customers having issues using Unity. They put in a ticket to ISS. We often be working quite deep on customer projects in some cases and just finding out where Unity is going wrong and helping customers kind of overcome obstacles in that. And I was working on a placement there, working on the consoles team, foundations, and features graphics teams. I will have to play there, but sorry.
Has anybody got any questions? This is a good opportunity.
So you've presented all sorts of arts, designs, and codes aspects of team, but the thing that got me into Blizzard games in the first place, and I saw that you worked with them on a few titles, was sound design. They have one of the best like quirky and stylistic sound design I've ever seen in any game studio. To the point where you hear them in like in a show or something, you hear the bare sample and you're like, oh, that's from Blizzard, isn't it? Who handles sound, and why are you keeping that secret from us?
It's not a secret. So we used to have an audio department in Electric Square. And at my previous studio, we had an internal, this was at Supermassive Games back in the day for horror stuff. But Rev Rooms is in Brighton. So they were born from Electric Square, set up their own studio just purely for audio design. But that discipline, you've got a mixture of programmers as well as audio designers as well. So it ranges from composition. So you've got music composing. I used to work with a guy called Daniel Pemberton at Lionhead, who composed all the music for the movies, the game that I worked on there. And then you go through to audio designers who implement as well. They go out and get like Foley, so ambience. When we did the reference trip for Dirt Rally, so I took out some audio equipment because the audio guys couldn't come. So I left out a sort of dictaphone with a microphone on it, and left that capturing audio by, there was a wood mill just by a river, one by a road, and just in the center of the forest as well. And it's amazing what ambient footage you get doing that. I could listen to it for ages. It's really nice. So yeah, there is, and then obviously programming, which Tim might be able to, or George might be able to answer a bit on. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on the coding front, we had an example not long ago where we had a programmer who was also a musician, and she was very accomplished as a generalist programmer, but obviously her passion was with music, and she went into specializing in audio. So yeah, that definitely happens. I'd characterize them as specialist roles within the different disciplines, and as Dan said, you'll have sound designers, the ones who essentially do what the gameplay designers do, but for audio. They think about how should this thing sound, how can we make this the most what's the word for it? Immersive experience for the player, and things like that. But the really technical audio guys also know a lot about things like environmental effects on the audio, the reverb and things like that. And I don't know enough about it to actually say all the right words for that kind of thing. But these guys really specialize in that and really know their stuff. So yeah, I would characterize them as sort of specialisms within the other disciplines, but they also tend to work together as their own team in some sense as well. Yeah.
Question about programming. We might have a boring answer about copy.
Programming's never boring.
Wait till you hear my question. So you say that you do a lot of earlier, you said. How does it work? So you're building.
We don't tend to sell our own assets as part. It's just our business structure isn't really built that way. But you know, game developers do. Some specialize in developing their own middleware for that kind of thing. So that is something that people could end up working on. Essentially, a library of vehicle related routines and things like that. What we do for the way that works inside our business model is we build the expertise and the experience to know how to do that. So a lot of our clients do require quite similar things to be done to the vehicles. And obviously, as an organization, we can sort of learn what those things are and get good at doing those things. If it's an engine change to support something different or a bug fix or whatever it is inside the engine, that's quite common. The other thing is for commercial games, it's really important that the designers have a lot of control over all of the attributes of how the car handles. It will vary from game to game exactly which ones are the most important. But in a game with lots of vehicles in it, it's super important that we listen to the designers and find out how they want that structured for this game. Sometimes you have one vehicle that kind of inherits from another and basically behaves very similarly to another vehicle, but has its own unique sort of twist on that. That's not something that the out-of-the-box stuff really has good support for. In general, you tend to want to do that differently. The other aspect is upgrades to vehicles and things like that. If you want to boost the engine power or something like that, the way that gets implemented is typically not part of the sort of core model that something like Unreal Engine would have built in. It needs some customization to basically to empower the designers to do their best work. So that's the sort of thing that we do there. But typically it's not done in our organization, at least as a library, but that does happen elsewhere. And certainly my first job was at Climax Racing, which became BlackRock Studio, and we really specialized in vehicle dynamics. And yeah, we definitely had our own technology for that back then. But since then, the off-the-shelf engines have come on a lot, and most of our clients who are doing this vehicle stuff actually just want this to work within something like Unreal. So it's changed a bit since then.
Just to say that, contrary to what, and I shouldn't say this because it's not what computer scientists are supposed to say, but a lot of this is the same thing that you repeat over and over, actually isn't really how it works. A lot of it is you're building a bespoke thing for this product. So the stuff that There's often a similar bit, but that's the quick bit to implement, and the devil is the detail. What is it about that particular game that makes that card do this thing in this game, and why is it different to this game which wants to do this thing? So even if you had those assets, you'd still spend your time doing that stuff.
And then define it. Possibly another studio.
You may have driven similar cars in games. That's very true.
And sequel.
Yeah, but even sequels. Hey,
Yeah.
Mike. Well, you can say the question, I can repeat it if it's easier, right?
The Zoom guys with you.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, so Electric Square has been around for quite a few years now. And I was just wondering, what do you think gives Electric Square that competitive edge that maybe other studios don't have?
Good question. We've probably all got different answers to that. I think one thing is we were built as a co-development studio, so we particularly specialized in that. We have a history as from other studios in the area that existed before that did a lot of racing vehicle type games. So that's our kind of like ninja skill. Although these days we do a much broader set of stuff. Second thing is, because we were built that way, we're a professional outfit. We come and do a job and do it well and get out of there. So we're adding more value often than companies have within their own studios. A bit like if you're going to get some building done on your house, right? You might kind of pay for decent quality building outfit so you get the job done with no stress and on time. And then that sort of, for us, that works really well because people want to come back and work with us again. That's my answer. Do you want to hear? Was your question a separate question? Yeah. Would you like art and design opinions? Yeah.
Thank you. This isn't really an art or design opinion. I just want to kind of give the other end of the candle opinion to that. So the question was, what makes Electric Square competitive as a studio versus other competitors? And Tim has outlined very well how we compete with other studios for projects. How do we compete with them for employees? By being better. I've worked here for 3 years. What was it that attracted me to Electric Square? The titles that they worked on were really, really cool. And the kind of IPs that I'd grown up playing and always wanted to. The skill set that I had was in demand. Everyone I spoke to at Electric Square, I'd visited before I joined to meet people, to see the area. Everyone was really nice, very friendly, very intelligent and knowledgeable. It's in a really cool location, right in this suite. I've never lived on the coast before. That's really nice. Yeah, that's kind of like the grounding from me.
Zoom people.
Zoom won't hear you.
So I was just wondering, how do larger companies approach Electric Square for co-development? How does that work?
It's my job. Yeah, that's a big question. So the obvious one is there are various conferences through the year, GDC and so on. There's one specifically called XDS, which is the External Development Services Conference, where publishers and development service providers all go. It's almost like speed dating for the games industry. We've got this job, we've got this job, and everyone queues up and chats. The other conferences are a bit more freeform, and we have a business development director whose job it is to set up meetings with clients, maintain their relationship through the rest of the year, keep checking in with them, see what projects there are. Some of it is just from conversations that people have, you know, maybe they've all been at a talk, gone for a drink afterwards and got chatting. It's like, oh, that's a great idea, we could work together. Sometimes it's friends who happen to know someone who knows someone who's got a project. But yeah, for us as a company, you literally can pay us to build a game with you. So you know what I mean? There's no particular criteria. I mean, if somebody's able to fund building a game, then there's a conversation to be had.
Can I ask you a question from the Zoom?
Yeah.
Which I think is quite relevant. Early careers. Do you offer internships or do you have any advice for anyone early in their career?
Dan would like to talk about that. Yes, we do. But, yeah, good.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, we do. We do internships, and usually it's through universities, and there's an application form on the website. And we tend to do it's throughout the university. It's like section of your university course most of the time. So we've had people with us for up to 3, 4, 5 months, and a lot of the time, the learnings from on the job tends to give a lot of the guys a job in our company as well. So right now I'm working with one intern from Howard University, and so she came to a talk that I did actually at Gobo Studio, one of our sister studios, and really liked the idea of Electric Square. Came in as an intern, artist intern, and she's doing great, amazing on a really big title that we're working on right now, which I can't talk about. But she's doing great. She's learning so much, and yeah, it's a good place to grow. It's competitive, and you definitely, if it's for an art role at least, I would say you need a good portfolio to at least get through that door. But obviously, it's still an option to go into things like QA as well. That's where I started. And there are guys that have gone through QA, moved into design, and grown from there. So it's not always the first job that you get, but you know, it's a foot in the door with QA as well. Yeah, past.
But yeah, we all, and same for engineering and design. We do internships. It is competitive, like Dan said. We pay interns, and you're expected as soon as possible to work on a real project. Like Dan was saying, so we have to try to look at interns essentially as people who may be converting into a full-time job with us. So it's both competitive because lots of people are interested, but also because you're competing effectively against people who've already graduated and might be looking at a job. But that said, it is a thing. And the worst mistake you can make is not applying. I spent many years thinking, oh, I'll never work in games. It's impossible. It's too hard.
Okay.
Hello.
This isn't so much specific to, I guess, a field, but more so, I guess, people's careers paths and paths in lives. And I think this kind of like relates somewhat to the previous answer, but I guess it's sort of like, how often do people find themselves like, I guess, moving into a position or field or role or specialty within like Electric Square from like, I guess, other backgrounds which aren't necessarily like related to what they end up doing, or or at least have like a very small connection.
Yeah, so as I understand the question is how often do people come into the video games industry through not the kind of vanilla route, like I did computer science and now I'm a programmer.
Yeah.
So maybe they've done, well, George is an example, right? He did a maths course degree, right? And then it happens. I would say it's not the default, but it's quite common. And one of the things I hope has come across today is there's such a range of skills that even if you're in the broad area of art or code, there are many subsets of skills in those areas which you might be bringing some actually really unique skill, right? In engineering, it's often if you've done rendering work or maybe optimization work that's not in games, but that will be directly transferable. Carlton made a number of points about like just life skills and things you learn from design that are relevant. I'm sure Dan's got examples, but I'm not so good at remembering the art ones. But yeah.
Yeah. Oh, we do get people from film industry, and that is the thing. People sort of jump between those industries that are similar, but obviously you want relatable skill sets that will work in games. So we've had film directors that I've worked with that came into my previous studio, worked with those guys, and they can relate because it's offline rendering for film, but similar techniques, similar software. So yeah.
Hi, I want to ask a question about AI actually. So apparently there are lots of AI assisted tools like Stable Diffusion or like compiler stuff. Like, does the studio might consider like using these kind of tools, or what's the studio viewpoint on these tools?
Is this a, like generative AI mod?
Yeah, in general.
The new AI wave stuff. Yeah, are we using it? Is a very good question and hot topic at the moment. The answer is yes, we do. But there are a lot of restrictions and we have to be very careful, particularly as you're pointing out, we don't own the IP and we're usually building stuff for other people. So often the rules of whether we can or can't use it for a project are not defined by us. They're defined by the company we're working with. That said, there's internal stuff that we can use it on and things like concepting ideas and those kind of bits for sure. We also have been running an R&D research project where we've built an entire game. It's a 2D game in this case. The 3D AI stuff isn't right there, but we have built an entire game to kind of test out and map the landscape, because that's, for our industry, that's kind of where it's at the moment. It's like figuring out what tools are actually good enough to produce shippable quality assets and get around any legal restrictions, because obviously we don't want to be plagiarizing, especially unintentionally plagiarizing, which is doubly bad. So that is my prediction, if you're interested on that side, is it is going to become more of a thing. And I think over time, the AI assisted tools will become just super powerful versions of tooling we already have. The Photoshop Auto Smart Fill is a classic example, right? There's going to become more of those things. And especially where you get assets in games that are not like the hero asset, that's probably always going to be built by a human, or at least for the foreseeable. But stuff that's a bit like mid distance or far distance, I think those kind of assets will start to become more auto-generated over time.
Hello. So, as a code dev studio, do you feel like you lose creative, like, influence on the IPs you work on? And do you also feel that because you're not the owner of the IP, it's harder to find passion to work on that project?
Yeah, fair question. And so the one thing about our company is, and I will say this to everyone I interview, is it's not the place to come if you want to work on a particular IP. You know, if you want to work on Grand Theft Auto, you should probably go to Rockstar, and you will work on that game most likely for 7 or 8 years till the next one ships. Fine. What we offer is a different thing. It's lots of variety of different projects, and people move between projects. But you have to not be too fussed about the particular project that you're working on. It's the enjoyment comes from the day-to-day, the people you're working with, and the tasks you're working on within that project. And honestly, every big game, even at any company, you're going to be one of 200, 300, 400 people who worked on that game. So a bit of a myth, I think, that you have creative control if you do work at one of the publishing companies. But it's not for everybody, so I would say that.
The other side of that as well is that we do get quite large chunks of work where we own huge sections of the game. So, you know, we've taken whole features from paper design right through to final. With the copyright stuff you talk about with the vehicles, we've drafted vehicles from paper design and built them, done the damage models, done the handling, owned the whole thing. So with that, we tend to do proposals to clients saying, this is what we want to do. Here's some options. What do you think? And they're like, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, like that one. Do that. And so generally, we do have quite a lot of ownership. We tend to be integrated into their studio as part of it. So we're connecting to their source control per force. We've got our own machines. We're basically part of them. One of the challenges actually is like for clients overseas, like America, is time difference. We tend to have a pocket of time where we do sync up and then we go through our day, or the other way around. But yeah, generally we've got really good sort of ownership as a team.
So I have a question about game engines. If you're switching between projects and you're switching, for example, like from Unreal Engine to a not normal one, sorry, I can't pronounce it. like to like source, how do you go about preparing your developers and like transitioning them between engines, like if they aren't familiar with them?
So in the art department, we tend to so like we've transitioned from like, so I've worked with probably over 10 different engines over the years. And there's definitely an onboarding period. So I've for Dirt Rally, for instance, that was an engine called Ego engine, which was fully integrated into 3ds Max. So they used 3ds Max as a level editor. So that takes a little bit of onboarding really as an artist and any other discipline really. And then yeah, so there is a transition period. We tend to get like a lot of documentation, or we go up to their studio as well and we have a sync up. And we've literally like unloaded information. If it's not documented, a lot of the time, sometimes documentation is not thorough or it's out of date pretty quickly. Things move fast. So yeah, basically it's best getting it from the horse's mouth, so to say, and go to meet them. Proprietary engine. But yeah, with switching from Unreal to Unity, same again, onboarding. I much prefer Unreal as an engine to work with. I didn't like the lighting pipeline in Unity. Felt that it was a bit archaic, but I feel bad saying that. But yeah, I found it not as sort of intuitive as Unreal, but I did a few projects in Unity and preferred Unreal. I think for smaller projects, maybe Unity might be a better way to go. But yeah, anyone else want to add a bit? There you go.
Just quickly, yeah, I wanted to say that also, I mean, when we're working on a proprietary engine, the partner we're working with will appreciate the fact that that our engineers don't know their engine. They need a bit of time to learn it, and they usually quite accepting of that fact. I mean, they really have to be, and they know about these kinds of things anyway, because whenever they hire new people, they need to train them up. So yeah, there is an onboarding time for getting used to any new engine. And particularly for the proprietary ones, that tends to get built into the kind of schedule, at the start of that project. It's a little bit easier with things like Unity and Unreal because they're off the shelf. They're freely available. There's a lot of documentation available online about them, and we can, for example, have people go through training exercises if we need to. And the skills are more transferable between projects on those engines as well, because more different clients use the same engine. So that is helpful.
First, thank you very much for the speakers for the very interesting presentation that you gave there. Could I ask if each member of the panel could tell me what they think a computer science degree should contain, so that will be interesting for the games industry? Specifically for Val, you can tell us what you think we should be adding to our curriculum here at Sussex.
I was going to say Val's. We've all been plotting a question for Val here. Should we start at that end so you've got a chance to?
For me, I think very strong knowledge of C++ is very important because that's a big focus of most of the things we work on. C# also works, but we tend to find that people find it easier to transition to C# rather than from C# to C++, for example. So having a deep understanding of that is extremely valuable for us. But also being able to understand how to implement different gameplay mechanics in the game is hugely valuable as well. And that's something you can get from projects and things like that. And collaborating with others, I think, is also extremely valuable to include in those courses.
I don't know what a computer science degree entails, I'm afraid. I'm sorry, I'm not sure like where the boundaries of it are and how you'd push further forward into design. Come back to me.
From an art perspective, I would say that if there's an opportunity to work with people in other disciplines for a group project, for instance, that'd be really useful. Like a lot of programmers, obviously, they would need to work with us and we need to work with them. So just solely working as a programmer on a programmer thing might not be enough. But working with other disciplines, if there's an opportunity to do that, then that'd be really cool, I think, for, yeah, open their eyes to, oh, you need that, do you? That'd be cool. Yeah, all right, I can work on that. Then, yeah, collaborative.
I haven't had time to think about my political answer. So I would actually going to echo what's being said at that end, and yeah, a lot more C++ being taught, but also when we are actually getting away from, and it feels bad saying this considering my background and potentially where I'll be going, emails depending, to get away from just one or two engines specifically and actually teach engine agnostic tooling, or even starting to get students interested in writing their own rendering pipelines. And so specifically with C++, a lot of it will focus on C#, and then you look at commercial projects and you will look at, oh, you've just used a native plugin to do all your functionality for everything. Cool, it's just C++. And then, or you have like some weird problem, like, I don't know, you're trying to get mouse locking and keyboard and mouse support working on iPad OS. And then you're like, oh, cool, this is just Objective-C we need to write to do this. And actually having that flexibility to jump actually out of that comfort zone of C# is going to be important. But also, I appreciate that's hard to do considering a lot of the ways we onboard. If you're trying to have a degree where you assume someone's coming from no programming language experience, it is possible to onboard them to C++, because that's what our foundation year does and does very effectively, but it might be harder to do that for a larger cohort. So I kind of appreciate the challenges either way, but that's at least my 2 cents.
I have to think of one that isn't one of those. Do you have one, Carl?
Yes.
Oh, 'cause I might steal yours. So my slightly dodging the question out is a portfolio of stuff. I know Dan mentioned it for art, but it also goes for engineering. Something you've done above and beyond the course. I have to interview a lot of people, and obviously everyone has done the core skills like you just mentioned, Val, and it's the people who've got something above and beyond that we can talk about. It makes for an interesting conversation, but also you can show off what you can do, and that isn't just reciting the things you've learned. It's like, I've mastered these things and I can use them to build this thing of my own, and that helps people to shine.
I want to add a +1 onto what Dan said. Group projects are a must, especially, well, with people in the same discipline. So you have different people that have different approaches to the same problem, and they need to be able to work that out, as well as how to interact with people in different disciplines and very different ways of thinking. But if there was one skill I had to put in there for making designers happy, it would be proper tooling. You can build something that's functional, and if if it's not quite approachable to someone, then that is less of an urgency in the short term, as that someone, whoever may need to use the tool, may still have access to you. They may still be able to contact you or type of a message on whatever software you use to communicate and ask you how to go through this. When you've been done on the project for a year and a half and somebody else is coming to it fresh, if the tool isn't clear, readable, easy to use by someone that's fresh to it, then that person is going to struggle. They'll take longer to do whatever they need to do. They may get to the wrong answer with it. So building something that is usable, functional to someone that hasn't seen it before is the skill I would use.
So considering some of like the challenges that you face developing in C++, do you ever think you might be developing in another language, say like Rust, for example?
I won't rule it out, but I don't think we've had much appetite for that from our clients. So because the way we work is co-dev, we work in the engines our clients want us to use, and I haven't heard any appetite for that at all from them. So I can see there's a lot of benefits, and I could see it happening, but it would take quite a lot of shift, and I think we're quite a long way away from there at the moment. You can call me out when I'm wrong in a year or two. I'm sure you'll remember this moment, but yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, because a lot of us probably come from computer science directly, a pathway within that maybe towards game dev. In terms of programming, I know you mentioned like C++, C# as languages you should know. Is that sort of across the board for all roles within game development? Or because I know within our course, we do group projects, but a lot of the time they're no more than 5 or 6 of us, and we're all on a computer science pathway. And a lot of the time it gets diluted almost. You don't have enough people to specialize. And obviously in a studio with you guys, you have hundreds of people. It's a lot easier to specialize more key into areas. And would you say that everyone going into the games industry should know a good level of programming, or is it the case that maybe they should consider switching to some kind of art course if they want to go into art and other related courses rather than just sticking with computer science? Is there sort of a gauge on how much programming everyone should know, well, rather than just sort of engineers?
I'll answer quickly from the engineering, but I'll pass on to the others after that. No, I don't think it's necessary for all of the disciplines to know it. I think it's a huge benefit when you do know it. It helps for the sort of interdepartment relations if you can speak on the same terms and understand some of the same constraints that we have to work to, but it's certainly not a requirement. I mean, sometimes artists are hired who have no computing experience at all, or this was historically a longer time ago, but actually I won't talk about the key attributes of artists, I'll leave that for Dan. But it's not necessarily about how well you use the computer from my perspective. There are disciplines like tech art, which is very much on that crossover, and tech artists tend to know quite a lot of Python. It's really useful for scripting inside the modeling tools. That's quite a big one. Some tech artists also know C++ or C# and use that for automating parts of the pipeline, or even on the C++ side for actually working on the game code as well. So there is quite a lot of crossover between departments for that kind of thing. But yeah, I'll pass on.
To answer the question shortly, you can get away with having no programming knowledge and getting into some paths. You could get away with not being able to program and be an artist or a designer or an audio guy or an advertiser or a producer. It's possible, but as George said, having a good grounding in it will definitely set you apart. It is beneficial to know how other departments work, how they function, how they think, especially for design. As a designer specifically, scripting is a very useful skill for all of us to have. You are likely at some point to be asked to create small logical systems, simple gameplay sequences, especially if you come to work at smaller studios. You may well be roped in to do this a lot more. At larger studios where you can specialize more, maybe less, but it is still a valuable skill to have. If you have a particularly strong desire to program and be a designer, then you can become a technical counterpart. You can be more involved with tooling, with pipeline, with defining kind of how best to create the system such that it meets your technical constraints. And more technical questions will wind up going to you if that's how you choose to develop. But yes, in short, for a lot of disciplines, it's not necessary. It will help. But there is usually a more technical counterpart to most disciplines that you'll come across.
Yeah, I'll just echo the same as Carlton here, that for art, no, it's not necessary at all. Obviously with QA and things like that, but if you did have programming, but were interested in art, then there is that transition through being a TA. So it's a good sort of footway into being involved in the art side. We do have procedural workflows and TAs that work purely in procedural work, in like Houdini, for instance, and develop tools that help artists do, build worlds and, help us with vehicles and things. But yeah, that side of it is like a transition, so you could work in that area. No, you don't need programming for that either, but definitely problem-solving skills. That a lot of the time, because I used to be a designer, I used to write script in language. I used to write in Lua. So I guess it was a technical designer that I used to be, really. But that really helps me with my work day to day. especially with troubleshooting, problem solving, helping others, having that deeper knowledge. Yeah, definitely helps. It's an advantage.
Oh, I'll just say that this is talking on Unity experience. Unity hired a great deal of non-technical people, even into actually someone who sat very near me, because the corner of the office that was lovingly called things like the Big in the City fan club. There was someone who sat that worked on release QA, basically testing very buggy versions of the engine before they released to become slightly less buggy versions of the engine. And they actually got hired specifically because they didn't come from a code background, because obviously people who don't come from code backgrounds need to use Unity at some point, whether that be for testing lighting tools or for even things as simple as someone who might be trying to learn this stuff, just trying to download the Unity hub and wait for that to load and test that out. And they came into the QA role specifically because they don't have that technical background. But generally, like, yeah, majority of the people at Unity do, but there are a lot of pockets of people, even at that kind of more technical engine middleware company, who very much don't have that technical background.
My answer is kind of similar. It's like especially in the modern day when Unity and Unreal are pretty common, maybe half or more games are built in those engines, even bigger games. It's the tooling is such that you don't need to program necessarily to be able to build good shippable content, and blueprints and C# and so forth are plenty good enough for that. I'd say if you want to be an engineer in the games industry, you do need to know programming super well, and probably C++, probably not assembly language and stuff anymore. But again, it helps. The HLSL George talked about, and the shade languages, those things are. It's not C++ because C++ is great, by the way. It's just a common language that does a bit of everything else, and it's sort of become standard. As you mentioned, there's languages like Rust, and there are a million languages, right? But so being able to jump between them is the important thing, knowing how to program, essentially. And I think that's what's underpinned about all of these is the technical artist, technical designer, QA. Actually, there's QA people who are good at QA because they have the technical knowledge. They know how to break the games. Likewise, QA who don't have the technical knowledge, and that means they break the games in unexpected ways. But knowing how that works is important. And those TA and technical design, I think, are upcoming roles, and perhaps historically where it used to be a bit more art, design, engineering. But these bridging those gaps now, I think, is a hot area.
We've been here a long time. Is it all right if we just take one last question?
Yes.
Someone's been waiting a while.
Sort of two semi-related things. One thing I noticed that you seem to do a lot of vehicle stuff. You talked about a lot about vehicle design. And also a lot of your older games seem to be all like racing games. Whereas you have two newer games, Diablo and Lords of the Fallen. How did your studio adapt to that change? And also, I know now a lot of big studios are switching to Unreal and Unity to like help, because a lot of people are familiar with that, to help bring in new people. How did that change? Has that changed the way your company works, only using like one or two engines as opposed to lots of different proprietary runs? Or is it you're the same basically?
Well, I didn't quite catch the second part.
So I know a lot of big studios are switching to only using Unreal or Unity as opposed to proprietary software. Has this affected the way your company works as you work on lots of different projects?
Yes, it has, and we've consciously pivoted the business to make sure we're keeping folks who've got the right skill set and training people up on as engines have changed. Historically, we used to use Unity as our primary engine. By the way, we're very happy with Unity. So I don't want there to be some kind of Unity Unreal war going on here, but all the engines are equally good. Just say. And how do we pivot that out of racing games? So that's kind of actually a little interesting-ish story. We did obviously a lot of racing games, quite often built in Unity, although one or two in Unreal. We specifically made a game called Detonation Racing on Apple Arcade where we used Unity dots. We were early adopters of that technology, probably too early. We had the ISS support package exactly to help us through that. It turns out we were told, oh, you're the second generation of people doing this. Actually, we were like the first, and we made a very dots heavy game, massively multi-threaded using too much tech. Anyway, it did ship. And off the back of that, we got project with Ubisoft, the Assassin's Creed VR game, which happened to be also being built in Unity Dots. It was Ubisoft moving out of their proprietary engine world at that point, or at least some of their studios were. And we were one of the few studios in the world that had Unity Dots experience, and so they hired us to work on that and we did a bunch of optimization for it. We've actually just been nominated in the recent awards for the technical achievement on that project, making the VR game support actual large numbers of crowd, not something trivial. But off the back of that, we've been doing games there with characters and action and so forth. So that allowed us to pitch, like genuinely pitch. We've got experience doing that kind of stuff. And we started working on games like Lords of the Fallen, doing boss battles on that. And then later Diablo, which was on the thing. So I could talk about this. I have to stop which ones I can talk about and which not. But it sort of builds from that, right? And we were consciously looking to for opportunities that got us out of the vehicle niche, because when you're a small company, having a specific skill, that's really a good way to go, because you're the go-to folk for that skill. As we've grown, vehicles in games is not enough to support a company of the size we are, so we've had to diversify.
Did like the staff you looked for change when you made that shift, or did you look for like the same type of people?
Yes, but it's gradual. So it wasn't like one day and these people around his, it was over 2 or 3 years probably. And as we've sort of all mentioned, we're mostly hiring generalists, T-shaped people. So people who are able to work in different technologies. So it's not been like a, massive shift like that. It's been more, some projects with their engines are closing down and other ones ramp up. So we can smooth it out.
Just to wind it up, 2 small plugs for BCS. I can't give you the details of our next monthly meeting, unfortunately, but it will be here, probably be the 3rd Wednesday of May, and it'll probably be games related. Secondly, if you don't already know, BCS give prizes for the 5 best student projects, final year projects in informatics. Just happens to be the case that last year all but 1 were games. So thanks all for coming, and can we thank our panel, please?